How to play fingerstyle or fingerpicking guitar, lesson 30. And in this lesson, we'll learn how to play the Andante in C major, Opus 35, number 1, by Fernando Sor. If you're a subscriber, you might have seen the video where I introduced this song a while back, and it just gave you some information about the composer and about the song that you might find useful. But if you didn't see that particular video, I'll put the link to it down below in the description, and it's well worth watching if you want to learn the tune. And if you're not a subscriber, or if you're new to this channel, this is part of a playlist, and this is lesson 30 of a complete fingerstyle course. And I'll put a link to the playlist for the complete course down below in the description. This lesson is the last lesson of book 1, which for the moment you can get completely free from the website, and I'll put details for that down below in the description. And for those of you who have been following this course, there's no need to panic because book 2 is well underway, and I'll start uploading those lessons very soon. Right, before we start learning how to play this tune, here it is all the way through for those of you who aren't familiar with it. Andante Opus 35, number 1, by Fernando Sor. Okay, let's get started. How to play Andante in C major, Opus 35, number 1, by Fernando Sor. As usual, we'll start with an overview of the complete tune. And the first thing I need to point out is that the tune is in 4/4 time. And we get the speed of the tune from the title, which is Andante, and Andante means walking pace, which is moderately slow. So this goes from anywhere in the 70 beats per minute to about 100 to 110 beats per minute. So there's quite a wide range there. And recently, when I've heard professional recordings of this tune, they've always been quite fast. So the definition of Andante is quite open in the case of this tune. You'll notice that I've put chord names above the score, and this is to make the tune easier to learn. And this tune is particularly good for anybody who's learnt to play the guitar contemporary style, but would like to venture into classical style music. And this is because the two different disciplines, classical and contemporary, learn to play guitar in very different ways. If you learn to play the guitar contemporary style, you start to learn chords virtually straight away. Whereas chords are hardly ever mentioned, if at all, during the early stages of learning how to play the classical guitar. And the great thing about this tune is you can learn it using chords as a reference. Looking through the tune carefully, you'll notice that nothing really truly repeats, as wherever there is something that seems like a repeat, there's always slight variations in it. Looking carefully through the tune, hopefully you'll notice that bars 9 and 10 and 11 and 12 are exactly the same. However, if you look carefully at these 4 bars, you'll notice that bars 9 and 10 have a P above them, and bars 11 and 12 have an F above them. And this means the bars should be played differently. I'll explain when we get down to those bars. Right, before I start teaching this tune, there's something I want you to bear in mind all the way through this tune. And that is that, as usual, I'll be teaching it using a metronome so that you can play along with me where you can. However, once you can play the tune from start to finish, you really want to drop the metronome, because you'll be able to make it sound a lot nicer without a metronome. Right, let's get started by learning bars 1 and 2. And whilst I said earlier there aren't any repeats, this is very, very similar to bars 25 and 26. So once you've learnt bars 1 and 2, you'll know those 2 bars as well. And looking at bars 1 and 2 and 25 and 26, you'll notice that the only difference is in bar 2, there's a bracket around the 2. And this bracket really means if you have trouble playing this section, you can omit that note. However, I'm not going to omit the notes, so I'll play it as if the brackets aren't there. But if you feel you need to, you can omit that note. And as I said earlier, this tune can be easier to learn if you use chords. So that's what I'll do. And this first 2 bars is clearly based around a C major chord. However, the only change to that chord is where we add the 4th finger to the 3rd fret of the top E string, creating a C add 5. Here's the first 2 bars being played at a slow 100 beats per minute. And here that is again. Try to play along with it if you think you're ready. And here that is again, one last time. Right, let's move on to the 3rd bar. And this bar is marked with an F. However, if you have trouble with the open F chord, you can play this as a partial F and place the fingers on as necessary, like this. However, if you don't have difficulty with the major F chord, you could use that chord and then add the 4th finger to create an F6 like this. Obviously, if you need to, you can pause the video here and just try both methods and find out which way you prefer to play it. Here's the 3rd bar being played. Firstly, the F method. And now the partial F method. And here that is again at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. Try and play along with it if you think you can. Right, we'll take a look at bar 4 now. However, we'll look at it in combination with bar 3. And this is because we want to get the joint right. And when you remove the 2nd and 3rd finger from the F shape, you'll want to keep the 3rd finger in place, or at least nearby, so it's easy to reapply. And we also have to add the fourth finger to the third fret of the B string in exactly the same way we did for the F chord. Here's bar 3 and 4 being played together at 100 beats per minute. I'll play it once, keeping the third finger in place, and then once removing the third finger. Here it is again, but this time with the fingers being removed. And here that is again at the same speed with a 2-bar introduction. Try and play along with it if you think you're ready. And here that is again, one last time, at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. Right, let's bring the first 2 bars and the second 2 bars together. But before we do that, let me just show you the join between the 2 sections. You'll remember when we played the first 2 bars that we formed a C shape. And when we form a C shape, we have the second and third finger next to each other on adjacent strings in the second and third frets. And this is exactly the same pattern you form to create the partial F or even the full F, only a string up. So to go between the C and the F, you just have to move this pattern up a string. You'd find it a beneficial exercise to just practice going between the C and the F with those 2 fingers. I'll do it here now just for a couple of bars so you can have a try, or at least you can see what I mean. And here that is again one last time. Hopefully you could now try the first line. So here it is being played at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. It's probably a good idea to listen to it the first time. Here that is again at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction in case you want to try and play along with it. And here that is again at 100 beats per minute. Now here that is again one last time, but this time at 120 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. Have a try at playing along with it if you think you're ready. Now we've spent quite a lot of time on line 1 and we've gone through it quite carefully. And this is because it lays the foundation for the rest of the tune. So if we look now at line 2, first of all, you'll notice that the first 2 bars are virtually identical to the first 2 bars of line 1. Then the third bar of line 2 has the same chord as the third bar of line 1. And finally, looking at the fourth bar of line 2, it's simply a C major with no additions or subtractions. So, with the knowledge you've already gained from line 1, you should be able to pretty much play through line 2 straight away. I'll play it through first so you can hear what it sounds like. So here's line 2 being played at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. Here that is again at the same speed with a 2-bar introduction. Try to play along with it if you think you're ready. Because lines 1 and 2 are so similar, let's try bringing them together now. So here they are being played at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. You might want to listen to it first before trying it. Here that is again at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. If you think you're ready, you can try and play along with it. Right, let's just try speeding this up and playing it at 110 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. But remember, don't worry if you're not ready to play along with these backings. You can just practice it by yourself until you're happy with the way you're playing it. Right, let's move on to line 3. But before we look at how to play them, first we'll look at the letters over line 3 and at the beginning of line 4. And there we've got a P, an F and an MF. And these tell us how we should be playing the music. The P stands for piano and it means to play quietly. The F stands for forte, or strong, loud. The MF stands for mezzo forte, which means basically fairly loud, or in between as you normally play. So, as this refers to this tune, the first 2 bars of line 3 you play quietly, then the second 2 bars of line 3 you play loudly, and then by the time you get to line 4, you just play normally. So if we look at the first 2 bars of line 3, they're identical to the second 2 bars of line 3. However, with what you just learnt, you'll know that you play the first 2 bars quietly, and then the second 2 bars loudly. To play this line, you're just going between 2 partial chord shapes, the partial G6 and the partial C. So before attempting this line, it's worth just practicing those 2 chord shapes, like this. Once you can go between those 2 chord shapes, you can try that line. So here it is at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. But firstly, I'll play it without the quiet and the loud passages. I'll just play it uniformly, just so you can concentrate on the actual notes. Here that is again, at the same speed with a 2-bar introduction, but this time I'll play the first 2 bars quietly and the second 2 bars loudly. I'm sure you noticed that when playing it quietly, not only did I pluck the strings very lightly, but I also moved my hand back away from the hole towards the bridge. And this is because when you play here, the guitar is a lot quieter. And then to play more loudly, I brought my hand back over the hole and plucked the strings more strongly. This is actually harder than it looks, because you really don't want the guitar to twang too much and buzz. So you want to pluck the guitar as hard as it can take before the tone goes really nasty. And the same technique works with an electric guitar. Here's the third line again with the quiet and loud at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. And here that is one last time at that speed. And if you're feeling more confident, here's that line again at 110 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. Before we try playing the tune again from the beginning, let's just go through line 4, because this kind of leads up to a natural comma in the music. And this line's a little bit strange, in that even though there's chord names above the score, I wouldn't bother trying to shape the chords, except for maybe the G6, because all the other notes are individual notes. And this line, and in fact the whole tune, is in open position, meaning you play the first fret with the first finger, the second fret with the second finger, the third fret with the third finger, and the fourth fret, if there was one, with the fourth finger. However, this rule is broken from time to time, where you play a third fret with the fourth finger in some and around some chord shapes. The G6 is an example of that. Here's that line showing just my fingering hand. The third finger, open string, the first finger, open string, the G6 with the second and the fourth finger, open string, the third finger, open strings, open strings, open strings, the first finger, then the second finger, then the third finger, open string, open string, open string. Here's line 4 being played at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. For the moment, just watch my hands, especially the fingering hand. If you need to practice that for a minute, you could pause the video here. But if you want to try playing along with me, here it is again at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. And if you're ready for a little bit more of a challenge, here it is again with a 2-bar introduction, but at 110 beats per minute. Right, if you think you're ready, here it is from the beginning down through to the end of the 4th line at 110 beats per minute. But if you're not ready, don't worry, just listen to how it should sound. And here that is again. Right, let's move on to the 5th and the 6th line. And the reason I'm bringing these two together is because they're identical apart from the last bar. These two lines can be played differently from the previous line because they've both got a number of partial chords. For example, in the first bar, there's a C add 5. In the second bar, there's a G6. And the third bar would be easier to play if you fingered a whole C major chord. And this applies to both line 5 and 6. However, there's nothing particularly hard in these two lines, as you've played the chord shapes in previous lines. Here's line 5 being played with a 2-bar introduction at 100 beats per minute. And here that is again, in case you want to try and play along with it. Now, the next line, the 6th line, is identical to that line, except for the last bar, where, again, I wouldn't suggest you shape the G chord. I'd just use the 3rd finger to play the 3rd fret on the bottom E string, and then the 4th finger to play the 3rd fret on the D string. Here's the 6th line being played at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. And here that is again, in case you'd like to try and play along with it. Right, here's lines 5 and 6 brought together at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. And here that is again, in case you want to try and play along with it. Right, let's go through the last two lines, line 7 and 8. And the reason I'm doing two lines here is because line 7 is virtually the same as line 1, except for the last bar. And the only thing we have to watch out for in that last bar is that the second note, which is the 3rd fret on the B string, should be played with the 4th finger. And this leaves the 3rd finger free for the next note. Here's that bar looking at the fingering hand. Open strings, then the 3rd fret on the B string with the 4th finger, then the 3rd fret on the D string and the 2nd fret on the G string with the 2nd and 3rd finger, and finally an open string again. Here's line 7 being played at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. Here that is again, in case you want to try playing along. Now, looking at the last line, you'll notice that the first bar is the same as the first bar on the 7th line. And for this, I'd play the complete C shape. And there's good reason for this. The pattern of the 2nd and 3rd finger next to one another comes across from the previous bar. And that shape can then be carried across to the next bar, where you play the partial F6. And by keeping this pattern together through those 3 bars can actually make the whole tune flow more smoothly. Here's those last 2 lines just showing my fingering hand at 100 beats per minute. Notice how I use the partial chords to keep a smooth flow and allow the bass notes to ring as long as possible. Important tips for fingerstyle guitar. Now, this doesn't apply to every tune you play, or every passage in every tune you play. However, a good generalization is when you're playing fingerstyle and when you're playing a tune like this, try to hold the bass note as long as you possibly can. And if you don't, the tune just won't sound right. Now, I've seen people who've taught themselves and they just haven't been aware of this. And because they get used to how they've learnt the tune, they don't know they're doing something wrong. But to somebody who knows the tune, it'll sound pretty awful. So you'll notice when I'm playing this tune, I try to hold the bass note as long as I possibly can. And this is why the 4th finger comes into play quite a lot. Because where, say, the 3rd finger is holding a bass note down, you might need to play another 3rd fret with the 4th finger. Also, with a tune like this that's classical, once you've got a good idea how the tune should sound, you want to drop the metronome, because the tune actually sounds better if the speed varies slightly. However, the tempo changes don't want to be random. You want to control them to create an emotional response to the music. And this is really important Again, this is the difference between a good guitarist and a bad guitarist, because you're basically acting and you want to try and put as much feeling as you can into the tune. And by increasing the speed and slowing down in places, you can actually create an emotional response. Also, you can use this technique to kind of cheat slightly. If you know there's a particular bar or chord change you have trouble with, you can slow down towards that bar and then speed up again after it. Doing this with thought can make the tune sound a lot nicer than if you just play it through at a uniform tempo. Right, back to the song. And here's the last two lines being played at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. And here that is again, in case you want to try and play along with it. Right, before we bring the whole tune together, here's the last 4 lines at 100 beats per minute to make sure you're thoroughly familiar with it. If you think you can, try playing along with it. And here that is again, in case you'd like to play along with it. And finally, here's the entire tune brought together at 100 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. Now here's the whole tune again, but at 120 beats per minute with a 2-bar introduction. Normally, at the end of the video, I'll put metronome beats, but for this tune, I'm not going to do that, because I want to encourage you to experiment with what we've spoken about in creating emotional response to the tune, and I think this is a good tune to practice that with. And to start with, don't worry if you're exaggerating. What you can do is exaggerate to start with, and then knock it back as you get used to the idea. Right, I'll sign out now so you can go and practice. Thank you very much for watching this video. And if you're new to the channel, please like, subscribe and hit the bell icon, and then you'll be notified when I upload new lessons. And if you need the tab for this lesson, which I would imagine you do, you can find it at www.ebooksforguitar.com. And I'll also put a link to a video down below in the description that shows you how to get the complete fingerstyle guitar course in PDF format completely free. To close, here's the song one last time without a metronome, so you can hear how you want it to eventually sound. Thanks again for watching, and I hope you come back again soon.